before crowns were claimed, before swords were raised, there was a river. The River Avon flowed through the heart of Wesseford, carrying whispers of destiny, memory, and fate. It had seen kingdoms rise and watched them fall, and when the time came, it chose its sons. The River Avon wound its silver path through the heart of Wesseford like an ancient storyteller, murmuring secrets to all who dared to listen. Its waters reflected the skies above, sometimes calm and radiant, sometimes dark and foreboding, much like the fate of the kingdom it nourished. Fishermen believed the river remembered every oath sworn upon its banks, every crown raised, and every betrayal drowned beneath its currents. At dawn, mist rose from the river's surface, curling like ghostly fingers around the stone bridges and willow trees. The city of Wesseford stirred slowly beyond its banks, unaware or unwilling to admit that change was creeping closer with every passing tide. High atop the citadel, King Edmund of Wesseford stood at the narrow window of his chamber, gazing down at the river he had known since boyhood. Once a warrior king whose presence alone commanded loyalty, Edmund was now a shadow of that legend. His breath came shallow and strained, and his once steady hands trembled as he leaned against the cold stone wall for support. The sickness had lingered far longer than the court physicians dared confess aloud. Within the great halls of the palace, unease festered like an unspoken curse. Nobles whispered behind silk sleeves and heavy tapestries, measuring alliances and weighing ambition against loyalty. The question of succession hung over Wesseford like a gathering storm. The king had no declared heir, and in the absence of certainty, desire sharpened into hunger. Council meetings grew tense. Smiles were practiced, words carefully chosen, yet eyes betrayed impatience. Old houses dreamed of reclaiming lost influence, while younger lords sensed opportunity in the king's frailty. Each believed the river would one day carry their name into legend. But legends, as the Avon knew well, were often born in blood. As evening fell, King Edmund summoned what strength he could and placed his palm upon the ancient stone altar overlooking the river, a relic from the founding of Wesseford. Tradition held that the first king had sworn an oath here, binding his bloodline to the land itself. Edmund closed his eyes and listened to the river's endless flow. "Guard this kingdom," he whispered, whether in prayer or command even he could no longer tell. The Avon answered only with its steady murmur, carrying his words downstream, as it had done for generations. Unseen by king or court, destiny had already begun to move. The river had taken the oath, and it never forgot. Steel rang against steel beneath a sky stained red by war. On the northern plains, banners of Wesseford snapped violently in the cold wind as Prince Richard rode at the head of his army, his armor marked by dust, blood, and triumph. Where others hesitated, Richard charged. Where fear took root, his fury burned it away. The rebels had chosen the high ground, believing the rocky hills would break the king's forces. They were wrong. With a roar that cut through the clash of arms, the crown prince drove his horse straight into the enemy line, blade flashing like lightning. His men followed without question, drawn by his sheer force of will. By sunset, the rebels were scattered, their cause drowned in the mud of the battlefield. Richard stood victorious among the fallen, chest heaving, eyes blazing with a fire that victory could not quench. His valor was undeniable. Songs would be sung of his courage, of how he fought like 10 men bound into one. Yet those who watched closely, veteran commanders and quiet advisors alike, saw more than bravery. They saw recklessness. Against counsel, Richard had ordered a frontal assault when patience might have saved lives. He had ignored the scouts' warnings, dismissed caution as cowardice, and answered every challenge with the edge of his sword. The victory had been costly. Too many banners of Wesseford would not return south. Miles away in the royal council chamber, the news was received with mixed relief. The rebellion had been crushed, yes, but at what price? Lords exchanged uneasy glances as the messengers spoke of Prince Richard's unyielding rage in battle. Some praised him as the perfect heir to a threatened throne. Others whispered that the same fire that defeated rebels could one day consume the kingdom itself. Prince Richard felt none of their doubt. To him, strength was the only language enemies understood. As he wiped his blade clean beside a burning rebel camp, he looked northward, daring the world to test him again. He had proven his right to the crown with blood and iron. What he did not see was the shadow his fury cast, long and dark, stretching all the way back to Wesseford, where a sick king's time was slipping away, and a fragile kingdom waited for a ruler who could master more than war. Where steel and fury ruled the northern fields, grace governed the halls of Wesseford. Lady Eleanor moved through the royal court with measured steps, her presence calm yet commanding. She spoke softly, but when she did, even the most powerful lords leaned closer to listen. Years spent observing the tides of power had taught her that influence did not always shout, it endured. Draped in muted silks rather than jewels, Eleanor understood the language of perception. She remembered names, debts, and slights with equal clarity. When tempers flared among rival houses, it was her voice that soothed them. When alliances threatened to fracture, it was her counsel that bound them again. Many in the court, even those who would never say it aloud, trusted her judgment more than the king's failing strength or the crown prince's raging fire. Her dreams stretched beyond Wesseford's stone walls. England was fractured, clans divided by old feuds, borders hardened by centuries of mistrust. Eleanor envisioned something different. Unity not forged by conquest, but by consent, a realm held together by shared purpose rather than fear. She believed peace could be stronger than any army if guided by the right hand. That hand, she knew, was not Prince Richard's. Richard's victories troubled her as much as they inspired awe. His courage was undeniable, but his temper threatened to unravel everything she sought to protect. A kingdom ruled by anger would know only endless war. Eleanor loved her brother, yet she feared the crown would magnify his worst instincts. Her hope rested instead with William, the youngest of the royal bloodline. Quiet, observant, and unburdened by pride, William listened more than he spoke. He learned of people, of history, of the fragile balance that held Wesseford together. Where Richard saw enemies, William saw causes. Where others saw weakness, Eleanor saw wisdom still taking shape. In the quiet hours of evening, Eleanor often stood by the palace windows overlooking the River Avon, watching its steady, patient flow. Empires rose and fell along its banks, yet the river endured by yielding, not resisting. Strength, she once whispered to William, is knowing when not to strike. As the king's health faded and the realm edged closer to reckoning, Lady Eleanor prepared herself for the battles yet to come. Battles not of swords, but of loyalty, legacy, and the future of a kingdom that desperately needed grace. Sir Thomas Grey preferred roads to courtrooms and horses to politics. Yet politics had a way of finding him all the same. He rode out from Wesseford at first light, a sealed leather satchel strapped close to his chest, its contents heavier than gold. The king's signet marked the scrolls within, orders, warnings, and truths meant for trusted eyes only. Thomas had been chosen not for his rank, but for his discretion, his quick wit, and his talent for surviving trouble with a smile and a blade. The forests beyond the capital whispered as he passed through them. Sunlight filtered through ancient oaks, casting shifting shadows that kept his hand near his sword. At a roadside inn, ale flowed freely in tongues even more so. Thomas listened, laughed, and learned. Merchants spoke of sudden troop movements. Farmers grumbled about taxes levied by lords who no longer waited for royal command. Someone, somewhere, was preparing for change. At Castle Redwyn, the first scroll was delivered under cover of dusk. The lord who received it read in silence, his face tightening with each line. He dismissed Thomas quickly, too quickly. As the knight mounted his horse, he noticed unfamiliar banners hanging within the walls, symbols of an alliance not yet declared. Further south, in villages clinging to riverbanks and hillsides, fear hid behind courtesy. People spoke of Prince Richard with awe and dread, of King Edmund's failing health, and of a coming reckoning no one dared name. Thomas began to sense the shape of the storm, ambition aligning itself long before the crown lay empty. One night, deep in the greenwood, Thomas discovered he was no longer alone. Steel flashed in the moonlight as masked riders emerged from the trees. Words failed. Blades spoke. Though outnumbered, Thomas fought with a practiced ease, his humor gone but his instincts sharp. When the clash ended, the riders fled, leaving behind a single token, a ring etched with a sigil he recognized from the council chamber. By the time Sir Thomas reached his final destination, he no longer saw himself as a mere messenger. The errand had become a warning. The crown was not only threatened by rebellion or war, but by secrets carried in whispers and sealed letters. As he turned his horse back toward Wesseford, Thomas knew one truth with chilling clarity. The kingdom was already divided, and the battle for it had begun long before any crown was raised. Lady Margaret had learned long ago that power favored those who waited. She appeared at court draped in mourning colors long after grief was expected to fade, her presence unsettling yet impossible to ignore. Few spoke openly of her past, but everyone knew fragments of the truth. A noble house erased by royal decree, a father condemned, brothers lost to prison cells and forgotten graves. History named it justice. Lady Margaret called it theft. She smiled often, listened more than she spoke, and remembered everything. Margaret understood that vengeance was not won with a blade, but with patience. She positioned herself carefully among the court's factions, offering comfort to those overlooked, counsel to those uncertain, and subtle encouragement to those already burning with ambition. Generals found her insights uncanny. Lords discovered their private doubts, spoken aloud, as if she had always known them. To one commander, she praised Prince Richard's strength, then quietly questioned whether such fury could be controlled once crowned. To another, she spoke admiringly of unity, then hinted that Lady Eleanor's vision left little room for older houses to retain influence. To a third, she asked simple questions about William, questions that planted dangerous possibilities. No lie passed her lips. She needed none. Behind closed doors, Lady Margaret kept relics of her fallen house. A cracked signet ring, a blood-stained letter, and a list of names written in her own careful hand. Each name belonged to someone who had prospered while her family burned. Each name would be repaid. Whispers followed her through candlelit corridors. Promises were made in alcoves. Letters changed hands without seals. By the time suspicion began to stir, loyalties had already shifted. Sir Thomas Grey, newly returned to court, noticed the pattern too late. The same sigil found on his attacker's ring appeared now in places it did not belong. Embroidered on cloaks, etched into goblets, hidden in plain sight. And always, Lady Margaret was nearby, watching, waiting. As the kingdom stood on the brink of succession, betrayal no longer hid in the shadows. It had become part of the court itself. And Lady Margaret, architect of quiet ruin, stepped gracefully through the chaos she had begun, knowing the crown would soon bleed without ever knowing her hand had guided the blade. The River Avon flowed as it always had, patient, unbroken, indifferent to the ambitions of men. By day it nourished the fields of Wesseford. By night it became a witness to secrets never meant for the sun. Under a pale moon, cloaked figures gathered along its banks, their footsteps muffled by damp earth and reeds. Torches were kept low, voices lower still. These were not drunken lords or wandering travelers, but men and women of rank who had learned that treason was safest when spoken beside running water. The river would carry their words away, or so they believed. They spoke of King Edmund's failing breath and of a throne soon to be empty. Some questioned Prince Richard's temper, fearing a reign ruled by blood and fire. Others dismissed Lady Eleanor's vision of unity as weakness dressed in silk. A few, bolder than the rest, spoke openly of ending the Westford line altogether, of choosing a ruler unbound by old oaths. From the shadows, Sir Thomas Grey listened. He had followed a rumor no one else took seriously, an offhand remark at court, a careless glance exchanged between two rivals who should have been enemies. Concealed among the willows, Thomas caught fragments of their designs. Troop movements discussed as hunts, bribes masked as gifts, and alliances sworn without banners or witnesses. Yet the truth remained maddeningly incomplete. Names were hinted at, but never spoken. Plans shifted mid-sentence. Each voice revealed a piece of the puzzle, but never enough to expose the whole. Thomas felt as though he were chasing reflections in the river, clear for a moment, then gone. At one point, a woman stepped forward, her face hidden, her voice calm and certain. She spoke of timing, of patience, of letting the royal family undo itself. Thomas did not see her face, but he recognized the tone. Lady Margaret's shadow lingered even where her body did not. When the gathering finally dispersed, the riverbank fell silent once more. The Avon whispered softly, as if amused by the arrogance of those who believed they could command fate. Sir Thomas retreated into the darkness, his thoughts heavy. He had learned enough to know the kingdom was in danger, but not enough to stop it. To accuse without proof would be to invite ruin. To remain silent would be to betray the crown he served. As dawn approached, mist rose from the river, erasing all trace of the night's conspiracies. But Sir Thomas knew the truth, however fractured, was now bound to him. And like the river itself, it would find a way to surface whether the kingdom was ready or not. Love, like power, was never safe within the walls of Wesseford. Lady Eleanor had guarded her heart with the same care she gave the kingdom, yet even wisdom faltered before quiet devotion. Her affection for Prince William was not born of ambition, but of recognition. In him she saw compassion unclouded by pride, strength tempered by thought. Their bond grew in unspoken moments, shared counsel in empty halls, long walks beside the Avon where politics loosened its grip, and silences that required no words. When the truth of their closeness began to surface, it stirred the court like a dropped stone in still water. Some whispered of impropriety, others of strategy. Allies questioned Eleanor's judgment. Rivals sharpened their suspicions. In a realm balanced on succession, even love became a weapon. William, ever reluctant to step into intrigue, found himself trapped by it. He loved Eleanor's vision of unity, yet feared that standing beside her would paint a target upon them both. Each public glance, each private word carried new risk. What had once been refuge now threatened to become their undoing. Elsewhere in the palace, Lady Margaret wove a far darker tapestry. She moved through candlelit chambers with practiced ease, offering comfort to weary generals and admiration to lords long starved of it. Her laughter softened defenses, her sorrow invited confessions. One by one, powerful men mistook her attention for affection, never realizing they were trading loyalty for illusion. Secrets were shared in moments of intimacy, promises sealed with desire rather than honor. Margaret kept none of them in her heart. She kept only their weaknesses. Prince Richard felt the shift before he could name it. Victories no longer earned him unquestioned support. Orders were obeyed slowly, if at all. Faces turned away when he entered a room. He sensed betrayal coiling through the court like smoke, stinging his eyes, but leaving nothing solid to strike. He confronted advisors, tested allies, and listened for lies, but treachery slipped through his grasp. Rage urged him to act, yet instinct warned that a single misstep could turn suspicion into rebellion. For the first time, his fury found no clear enemy. As night fell over Westford, love and treachery walked the same corridors, indistinguishable in the dim light. Bonds of the heart clashed with ambitions of power, and every choice carried a cost. By the river's edge, the Avon flowed on, bearing witness once more. It had seen love topple kings and desire undo dynasties. And as the kingdom drew closer to its breaking point, the river carried this truth forward. The greatest betrayals are not born of hatred, but of the things people cherish most. The storm broke without warning. From the western shires came word of open rebellion. Towns refusing royal levy, banners raised in defiance, and garrisons overrun before messengers could flee. What had once been whispers now roared into action. The court reeled, but Prince Richard did not hesitate. War was the one truth he trusted. Within days, the army of Wesseford marched west, iron and resolve bound together beneath the prince's command. Richard rode at the front, as always, his presence a promise of victory. The rebels would learn, as others had, that defiance was paid for in blood. They did not fight as expected. The first clashes were too easy. Rebel forces withdrew at the slightest pressure, abandoning villages and roads with suspicious haste. Scouts reported confusion among the enemy, but Richard dismissed the warnings. He pressed forward, convinced fear had already claimed his foes. It was a lie carefully crafted. Deep within a narrow pass flanked by wooded hills, the trap closed. Horns sounded from every direction as hidden forces surged forth. Arrows darkened the sky. Supply wagons burned. The prince's army found itself hemmed in by terrain and betrayal alike. Commands were lost in the chaos as rebel leaders. Men long thought loyal revealed their true banners. At the heart of the turmoil, Prince Richard fought like the legend he had become. He cut a path through the enemy, refusing retreat, shouting orders no one could hear. Yet courage could not mend broken lines nor restore vanished allies. For the first time, his fury met something it could not break. It was Sir Thomas Grey who saw the truth through the smoke. Recognizing the pattern of the ambush and the sigils of Lady Margaret's hidden allies, Thomas rode hard toward the prince. Fighting with grim precision, he dragged Richard from the collapsing center of the field, rallying a desperate rearguard just long enough to force an escape. By nightfall, the surviving forces had withdrawn, battered but alive. Richard did not speak as they rode from the battlefield. The defeat was not total, but it was undeniable. Men had died not because of weakness, but because of deception, and because he had been outmaneuvered. Worse still, it was not the rebels who had bested him, but shadows within his own kingdom. When they reached camp, Richard turned on Sir Thomas, his voice cold with restrained fury. He thanked him, yes, but the gratitude tasted bitter. To be saved was to be exposed. To owe survival was to admit vulnerability. That night, the storm of steel passed, leaving behind broken blades and wounded pride. Prince Richard stared into the fire, his reflection fractured in the flames. He swore silently that he would never be caught unaware again. But somewhere far from the battlefield, Lady Margaret received word of the ambush's success and smiled. Not at the defeat, but at the damage done. The army could be rebuilt. Pride, once shattered, was far more dangerous. The River Avon had seen many kings, but it had chosen few. In the weeks following the Western defeat, while the court argued and generals blamed one another, Prince William walked among the people. He traveled without banners or escort, listening more than speaking, sharing bread with villagers and tending wounds beside weary soldiers. Where others offered promises, William offered presence. And in a kingdom starved of trust, that proved powerful. Men who had marched under Prince Richard's command spoke quietly of William's steadiness. He did not belittle their losses nor praise himself for restraint. He honored the fallen by remembering their names. In camps scarred by battle, his calm voice restored order where fear still lingered. Loyalty, once shaken, began to settle again, not through fear, but through faith. By the banks of the Avon, word spread as swiftly as the river's flow. Fishermen claimed the waters ran clearer when William passed. Farmers swore their fields felt lighter beneath his footsteps. Such stories might have been dismissed as superstition, yet even hardened soldiers found themselves believing. The river that bound Westford together seemed to recognize him, reflecting his image with an uncommon stillness. One evening, as the sun sank low, William stood alone at the Avon's edge. The current brushed gently against the stones, cool and steady. He knelt and placed his hand in the water, not in command, but in respect. Those watching from afar later said the wind fell silent at that moment, as if the land itself listened. Unlike others before him, William did not claim destiny. He accepted responsibility. When unrest flared, it was his name the people called, not as a challenge to the crown, but as a hope for what it could become. Soldiers began wearing simple blue cords, the color of the Avon, as quiet signs of allegiance. No decree had ordered it. No oath had been demanded. The court could no longer ignore what was happening beyond its walls. Some saw William's rise as salvation. Others saw it as a threat more dangerous than open rebellion. And deep within the palace, forces already at work began to shift their designs. A ruler loved by the people was harder to remove than one feared. As night fell, the Avon continued its endless journey, carrying whispers of a new name toward every corner of the realm. Whether by fate or by choice, the river had bound itself to Prince William, and in doing so, it had set the final trial in motion. Dawn came softly to Wesseford, as if the kingdom itself feared waking too suddenly from a long and troubled night. Truth, once scattered like fragments along the River Avon, finally gathered its strength. Betrayals were brought into the open, sealed letters revealed, false alliances unraveled, and whispered plots spoken aloud before the court. The web Lady Margaret had so patiently woven could no longer hold. She stood alone when the reckoning came, her composure unbroken even as her designs collapsed around her. Confronted with the consequences of her vengeance, she did not beg nor deny. Her end was quiet and tragic, marked not by triumph or cruelty, but by the sorrow of a woman who had mistaken ruin for justice. With her fall, the shadows she commanded dissolved at last. Prince Richard was among those forced to face the truth hardest of all. The fire that had once defined him burned lower now, tempered by defeat, loss, and the weight of lives placed in his hands. Before the court and the army he once led, Richard bent his knee to his younger brother, not in shame, but in understanding. He spoke plainly of his flaws, of the rage that had blinded him, and of the strength he now recognized in William, the strength to listen, to endure, and to unite. The moment marked the end of rivalry and the beginning of reconciliation. At William's side stood Lady Eleanor, her counsel steady as ever. She guided the transition not with force, but with wisdom, healing divisions, honoring old houses while opening paths for new voices. Her vision of unity, once fragile, took root in policy and practice alike. When Prince William ascended the throne, there were no grand declarations of conquest. Instead, he swore an oath to serve, not to rule by fear, but to lead by trust. The people answered not with silence, but with hope. Beyond the walls of the city, the River Avon flowed on, eternal and unbroken. It had carried ambition and sorrow, fury and grace. Now it carried legacy, the story of brothers reconciled, of justice restored, and of a kingdom reborn. As sunlight danced upon its waters, Wesseford entered a new age, and the river, faithful as ever, bore the memory of its sons forward into history, whispering their names to the lands yet to come.